You doing? How you doing?
All right, but my days.
I was gonna say, not old. Not old.
Middle age. Middle of something. Something.
So Mike, are you getting, I just opened my mics. I didn't have. That was what you're looking for.
Hey, we
Usually keep it down so you don't have conversations. When I open it up, I.
Yeah, and
Yeah, because I normally keep that. I don't want to catch conversations.
No.
Oh, well, I'm actually, yeah.
I don't know.
I'm getting off on, this way. No, I'm not getting.
I didn't know if you're here.
I'm here, but I kind of. heard everything, but it's like-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We'll call this meeting to order. Ms. Henry, please call the roll.
Ms. Hubbard. Ms. Hogan.
Here.
Ms. Sonia.
Present.
Ms. Val.
Present.
Ms. Jones. Here. Ms. Cousins.
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
We have a forum.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight for our staff recognition, I would like to recognize the first meeting for our new interim superintendent, Dr. Nicole Williams. It's day 2, week 2. And so Dr. Williams, I turn it over to you for the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much, President Davis. Good evening, everyone.
Amen.
So in our spirit of excellence, I'm pleased to report this evening that we are on schedule to welcome our Central Visual and Performing Arts scholars, our students, back to in-person learning on Tuesday, January 17th. I want to personally thank, and we want to thank as a board superintendent's governance team, the entire team at Central Visual Performing Arts, as well as our operations department, specifically our facilities team members, for their hard work in getting us to this point of readiness. We are inspired. Yes, thank you. They've worked tirelessly. We are inspired by the strength, perseverance, and courage of our students, our scholars, our families, and our staff members at Central Visual and Performing Arts. Thank you to our principal, Dr. Casey Seal Shahid, and her team for leading with excellence. Our St. Louis Public Schools Finish Line program a college-bound program for seniors in partnership with Harris-Stowe State University, has kicked off the second semester today. It started today. We are so proud of our scholars. The Finish Line program helps our students, our scholars who need extra support to earn their high school diploma, and seniors who are working to earn college credits while finishing high school. We thank Ryan L. Jackson of Volunteer Mentor Services, who is the SLPS Director of Finish Line, Program Counselor Juma Fenoy, Advisor Dr. Letitia Smith, Network Superintendent Dr. Crystal Gale, and all of the hardworking staff and mentors who have helped this valuable program double in size this school year. Please mark your calendars for January 31st. January 31st is the day when our St. Louis Public Schools Parent Action Committee, our PAC, under the leadership of President Emily Kelso, in collaboration with Gloria Nolan, our SLPS Parent Liaison, and Alana Parks, our SLPS Director of Family and Community Engagement, they will lead the Parent Day of Action to Jefferson City to provide, you can clap, yes, absolutely, thank you, to provide the perspective of our students, our scholars, and families to lawmakers on several legislative topics, including poverty, trauma, and homelessness. More information will be forthcoming, so please stay tuned to the district's social media channel. Finally, we received some very good news from the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education regarding student reimbursements connected to the global pandemic. Parents, your child could be eligible for funds under the new Pandemic Electronic Benefit Transfer Program, PEBT. Students who are quarantined with COVID-19 and unable to receive lunch are eligible for reimbursement through the PEBT program. This opportunity applies to the 2021-2022 school year and the summer of 2022. To find out if your child qualifies, please visit slps.org/PEBT under the food services section for information on how to access these funds. You will also find frequently asked questions online. For additional information, please call our hotline at 314-345-5656. All of the information that I just shared will be available on our website. A very gentle reminder this evening that our district will be closed on Monday, January 16th, in observance of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday. And now I am so pleased to center our work in the students, the scholars that we serve here in the St. Louis Public Schools. For your enjoyment this evening, I'd like to showcase and highlight one of our student musicians. Please welcome Collegiate School of Medicine and Bioscience, CSMB senior, Anandi Varadachari. Is that correct? But before she comes to the mic, I just want to share some very exciting news about her. Her bio is just so impressive. And I do want to take a moment to thank Dr. Letitia Smith, our Director of Professional Development here in St. Louis Public Schools, and Mrs. Kay Harrelson, our Performing Arts Curriculum Specialist. They have worked tirelessly to bring our students, our scholars, to this forum this evening. So thank you so much. I do want to take a moment and recognize Principal Fred Steele from Collegiate School for Collegiate School of Medicine and Bioscience, CSMB. I always say the acronym, but I want to say it out because I do think it's important to do so. I want to recognize and acknowledge Mr. Fred Steele, our principal, who's in the audience this evening. So please give me a moment and just let me share a little bit about Anandi. She is just doing some Incredible work. She's currently a senior. She has been a student, a scholar here in the St. Louis Public Schools for 7 years. She started playing trombone at McKinley Classical Leadership Academy in the 7th grade, and she was inspired by the band concert the previous year. She was a 7th grader and saw this wonderful opportunity to get involved. This year, she will participate in the 2023 Missouri All-State Concert Band at the end of this month. She plans to study music and become a music educator after her undergraduate years in college. We would welcome her back to serve our scholars here in the St. Louis Public Schools. Let's give her a rousing round of applause as we bring her up, and she'll share this evening a selection called Andante et Allegro. Thank you. It's amazing the talent that we have here in the St. Louis Public Schools. We are in pursuit of equity and excellence. Thank you. That concludes the superintendent's reports. President Davis, thank you.
Next, we'll move to presentations. I believe it's Ms. Banks.
Well, finance, not quite as exciting as trombone. So I'm Angie Banks, Chief Financial Officer, and tonight I'm here to give a highlight of the Q2 financials for the current fiscal year. That would include October through December. So of course, our financial objectives are to maintain full accreditation, align with the strategic plan, which I guess I'll be updating this to Transformation 4.0, align with That also to maintain long-term financial stability and instill high expectations and accountability for staff and students. So tonight I'll be reviewing the ESSER spend to date, and then the overall Q2 financials, the preliminary results, and talk a little bit about our financial outlook and answer any questions that anyone might have. So for ESSER 2, this includes both 2022 spend and 2023 through December 22. We have spent approximately 50% of our allocation of a little over $46 million. So we've spent roughly $23 million in the major categories that you see in the lower half of the slide, with direct instruction and student support really leading the way. We do have ESSER meetings every Thursday to ensure that the spend is in line with the plans that have been established and that the funds will be utilized. So with us being at 40%, we have a little ways to go as these funds need to be utilized by September of 23. And we certainly plan to spend them all. Schools and departments really have until March 31st to encumber these funds. And we'll be working closely to get that done for ESSER 2. Regarding ESSER 3, as of December 2022, we have spent about 15% of the allocation, representing about $15.5 million. And you'll note that the largest spend has been in continuation and indirect services. The largest amount making up that category are the August and December retention incentives. But you can see in the description some of the items that were purchased in those various categories. Now with the ESSER 3 funds, there is a 20% requirement to spend in learning loss or unfinished learning initiatives. So you can see that we spent a little over $2.7 million in that category so far. And we do have until September of 2024 to utilize all of these funds. So a little bit more time. So looking at the overall results for Q2, regarding revenue, the majority of the revenue through December 30 has been in general operating fund, most of which includes property taxes, sales taxes, and formula revenue, although we do have some FEMA funds that were reimbursed and a small amount of other federal funds. Now, this time in December, we typically have two, checks from the city for property taxes. And due to some glitches in the city system, we did not receive our second check, if you will. So what you'll see tonight is probably the revenue will be short by probably $60 million, which we anticipate receiving either this week or next week. The non-payroll expenditures over $250,000 are listed on the bottom half of the slide. And of interest might be the contracted repairs, much of which were for the flooding that the district and the city experienced, which the FEMA funds were reimbursing some of those costs. So our revenue for Q2, we received about $61.3 million of revenue. And for the year ending December 2022, we've received about 16.3% of the revenue budget. And you can see how that's broken out in the different revenue categories, with the local category where we show about $58 million. That's where we would typically see about $120 million right now. So we'll see some big numbers in the next quarter. Regarding our expenditures for Q2, we spent about $105 million. And for the year-to-date through 22, spent about 35.5% of the expenditure budget. You can see that our salary and benefit expenditures are right at about 50%, which makes sense. We're about halfway through the year, not quite from a salary and expenditure standpoint, but those expenditures are much higher than the other categories, which is not unusual. So just when I was celebrating the end of the audit in December, we had a little bit of a snag with some post-audit adjustments with our E-rate program, which is considered a high-risk program. And these were actually some American Rescue Plan E-rate funds. So the auditors identified a miscoding, which now we're which really threw the E-rate expenditures into an auditable category. So the finance department is working with the auditors to clear up some of that, and I will certainly keep you apprised of what's going on. In addition, we will be presenting our findings or our response to findings at the next board meeting. Nonetheless, we are still in a very strong financial position, and as of the end of fiscal year 2022, June 30, we have an unrestricted fund balance of about 47%, with significant funding opportunities before us with the remainder of the ESSER funds and the Prop S funds and all of our other funding. So that concludes my presentation, and I will entertain any questions you may have.
You're so calm, $60 million glitch. Do they bring that in like a big Ed McMahon check or?
Surprising that we're still getting a physical check.
I thought that was, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yes.
My question is about the ESSER 2 money. And so my recollection is last year, we sort of went through an exercise with principals who had some engagement with their teachers and students to identify projects. And so we still have a way to go. Is that still the process that's going on? Did they get a second round of that? Or are we still fulfilling that first round of identification?
We're still filling that first allocation. There have really been no additional allocations to the schools. So there's still quite a bit of funds, and they're putting in requisitions. As you know, a lot has gone to Lakeshore Learning for, the flexible furniture and things, but there's also quite a few things in the facilities area where we're spending. And of course, we have those issues with getting those capital items, to the district.
I do have a question about the ESSER 2 funds as well. And just recently, this Saturday, we had a board retreat, and I was pretty excited to find out that we had so much money left. And I, like Matt, I'm really interested in knowing exactly what it is that the students and the teachers are asking for. Because I have not had an opportunity to look at the list, and I really would like to look at a list of what it is, the wish list, if you want to call it that, of items that our students and our staff would like to have, because after observing some of our classrooms, I think we are in I'm so glad that we have someone on staff that's going through and they're going to take care and make sure that we have brand new chairs and tables and floors and windows and things like that. But there are other items with the reading and that kind of thing. I want to understand what it is that the ESSER 2 funds can purchase. And I think if the students and staff understood what it is, then they could put together a better list, because I think it would be a real tragedy to leave any monies left if we have monies available, because this is not an everyday occurrence.
Absolutely. I know that there has been a lot of work done, and particularly with Dr. Claire Crapo, our new interim chief of staff. She has worked very closely with the schools and their plans. And I know that the schools all have had meetings with their staff to develop their lists of wants and needs. In addition, that the academic office really helped to vet, what would be consistent with the plans. So I guess I don't have the list, but there are certainly lists that we can provide. There's absolutely enough funds to make sure that we get all the things we need. But what we didn't want to do is just go out and spend money on things that we were not going to utilize consistent with the plans for learning and curriculum and instruction. So
What I'll do, Board Trustee Jones, we'll have an ESSER presentation at our next board meeting at a work session. We'll have Dr. Claire Crapo kind of frame where we are with ESSER 2 and the work that happens on a weekly basis at our ESSER think tank, we like to call it, where we come together, operations and academics, to really talk about where we are with ESSER. So we'll have a presentation at our next board meeting.
And Dr. Williams, can we also get a copy of a timeline of the rollout for some of the work that we've seen that needs to be done and an idea of when that's going to happen? Like some of it is, I realize it's going to be this summer probably, but if we could get a timeline, that would be great as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ms. Soni?
I just, first of all, Ms. Banks, you did such a great job. I know how we've been talking about this for a while, and I feel like you have the post-audit glow. So congratulations to you. I think I have a little bit of similar to what's been raised before. Do you have any concerns that we won't spend all of the money in time? Because it just looks like we're way under what we are, like what we have to allocate.
yeah, well, of course, I always get nervous, and we've been talking about these ESSER funds, it seems like for years, but planning does take time. And we certainly do have backup plans for the funds that may have been allocated to the schools and departments, that if it's not used, we have a backup plan to use those funds to make sure that they are spent down appropriately.
Okay, and I do think that I saw to what Ms. Jones was asking about earlier. I think Dr. Adams did show us, like, he gave every principal, I think, almost like a menu of things that they could purchase and buy that were covered by ESSER. And then I think he allowed the principals to pick their. I think I remember him kind of showing that to us. So maybe just something to help find it when you all are referencing it. And then also whatever we can do to encourage principals and staff that we want them to spend it, that we want them to have an abundance mindset, that this money is here for academic excellence and for them to get what they need to support our scholars and their staff, like whatever we can do. Because I think sometimes people get nervous, and I understand districts are often not in positions where we have a lot of money. So I just want to make sure that, staff and principals, that they understand that it's okay and we want you to spend it.
Yes.
And I'm sure anything we can do as a board too, to send that encouraging, open welcome. Because I just, that would be such a shame for us to have any funds, not just not allocated, but even to have to use a backup option when teachers and staff and principals in a school every day, they know what their needs are, parents and kids. I think this is an opportunity for us to meet specific needs, and I would hate to see us dwindle that.
Thank you.
Ms. Cousins?
Banks, can you clarify or give me more information in regards to the 60 million that we're waiting from the city? What is that in reference to?
Let me make sure I heard you. Is that reference to funding from the city that we have not yet received?
The 60 million from the city.
The
she wanted
60
some
million,
clarification.
basically it represents our current property taxes that when the board approved the tax levy in September, these would be basically some of the first funds that we receive from our residential and commercial property owners. And typically we would receive about $60 million in that second check, if you will. So typically between December and January, we receive about 90% of our property taxes. So those are typically the big months. So January, we certainly expect to be a very large revenue month.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jones?
I just want to jump back to the question that I asked earlier. What I really wanted to see was the students' voices heard a little bit more. I remember that conversation with Dr. Adams about the staff and the principal having the opportunity to put that list together. But I mean, many of our students have better technology at home than they do at school. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing from the students, because it was not clear to me that the principals and the staff were taking into account what the students were thinking about, what they were asking for, because it would seem that we would start thinking outside of the box and take an opportunity right now while we have the funds to just think futuristically about what it is that we want the district to become. And so I'm just really hoping that perhaps somewhere on the district website that we will allow our students from each school to just give suggestions about what it is that they would like to see or experience at school, and then go from there. I know that there is a matter of a timeline that we have to follow, but that's what I'm really asking about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for that comment. We are looking at putting together our data dashboard, our ESSER data dashboard, and centering a student voice. I think you'll be very pleased to see our spirit of excellence at our next board meeting, where we showcase some of the robotics work that's happening across the district with ESSER funds.
Thank you, Ms. Banks. Our next presentation is Dr. Sarah Chung from the St. Louis School Research Practice Collaborative. We're very excited to have Dr. Chung talk about this exciting project.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Hello, nice to see you and Happy New Year. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak with you on partnering with the St. Louis School Research Practice Collaborative, or what we'll call the SRPC from now until the end of this presentation. This month marks 1 year since the beginning of our memorandum of understanding together with SLPS. And so per our MOU, we have it set so that we have the privilege of updating you on our work, both the shiny spots and the hard spots, as well as what's ahead in the future. So at various points in this presentation, I'll pause because, again, we're going to be talking about research. So your eyes may feel like, they feel a little blurry or glazing over, but I'll pause for questions or clarifications, and then we'll have a time at the end for discussion afterwards. So for those who I have not met, my name is Dr. Sarah Chung, and I come to this work as both a system dynamicist and a social worker. I have expertise in adolescent social and emotional mental health in schools, and specifically for kids who come from ethnically marginalized backgrounds. I'm also the executive director of SKIP, and was asked by the SRPC partners to provide interim project management pro bono in the absence of a formalized permanent structure during this pilot session. So though now I have various titles to my name, I do want to share why I care so much about this project and public schools in particular. First, I am a SLPS mom, very proud to be a mom of 2 high school students at SLPS. And more than that, I'm a child of immigrants who were from Korea who came to the US, hoping to provide a better education for their children. Most of our days growing up were spent in school, but even at the young age of 6, my sister and I would come home to an empty house while my parents hustled in the back of a restaurant kitchen for 12 hours a day or more. It was very lonely and it was very isolating. Thankfully, however, even in rural Missouri, the public school leaders, educators, and classmates that surrounded me became my supporters and friends, helping even to mitigate the racism that we and our family experienced in the community at large. And it's in this environment that I came to love learning. It's where I was introduced to the beauty and the amazingness of science, and where I came to enjoy loving and reading books. Public school is also where I developed skills in algebra and calculus, which I like to remind my high school age children that I actually still do use in my current work, much to their chagrin. And so each of you serving in this place, I just want to say thank you. I'm sure there are many students just like me who are benefiting from your overtime hours. I know you've been very busy this weekend and today in this actual work. But this is the power and the potential of public education. And it's from this root that our mission at SKIP exists. So just to kind of give you a brief overview of our organization, SKIP is working with people at the center. We truly believe that people who have lived experience, who are going through the systems that they're currently in, have so much rich data and knowledge and understanding of how to even create systemic solutions to move forward. And so our small 3-person team and full-time staff are also funded through contracts and through the investment of a local family foundation who has roots in St. Louis. Not only do we serve the SRPC, but we've been asked by a diverse group of organizations to help them conduct systems thinking facilitation, research, and analysis. Historically, this includes partners such as SLPS through the Early Childhood Education Department, the CPN, the St. Louis County Children's Services Fund, and these have all been pro bono projects. Nationally, we've also provided consultation to the Centers for Disease Control and the U.S. Office of Population Affairs, amongst many others. In all of our work, we don't pretend to know any answers. That would be the antithesis of actually how we operate. Instead, we simply offer a process for facilitating meetings and listening to different perspectives. So our role in the SRPC has been to set up meetings, to facilitate workshops, and to broker the relationship between researchers and educators in schools. Before we get too much into the weeds about what this SRPC is, I want to take a moment to acknowledge what it's not. Traditional research, as it has been done in the past, often has a certain paradigm where you have one expert researcher who may talk to the other colleagues that they work with, and they develop some research questions, things they want to know, things they want to understand. They may go to people in schools, Board of Education, the research department, and ask, hey, can we do a survey in your schools? Can we do a survey in your classrooms? Can we talk to your teachers? This process tends to be very extractive. They then take this knowledge, do an analysis, and then maybe publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. Often this work is done in a silo, and the research never really comes back to benefit the people it was extracted from. This is highly exploitative in some ways. Sometimes you get folks who do have the ability to come back and actually do want to give back to the schools in which they're extracting, but more often than not, the accumulation of this practice has caused a lot of harm to communities. We want to acknowledge that. A research practice partnership is a bit different in that it acknowledges and addresses those harms that have been done to communities through the research process, and that often benefit the researcher and the institutions from which the researcher presides, and then not the people it researches. So this is a little different in that the research practice partnership really tries to acknowledge diverse forms of expertise. Just because you have a PhD at the end of your name does not mean you are the expert. We really look to the people in the classrooms who spend 8 hours a day working with kids as experts in this practice, and together they develop research questions that might help them understand how to serve kids better. This is joint work, and together they're engaging, they're talking, they're trying to interpret findings for the practical knowledge and improvement of the field. It's a slight difference, and I'm sure there's many examples where this doesn't always work out perfectly, but it is trying to honor the process of science. It's trying to honor the process of inquiry and observation and understanding to do better for kids. So there's an example of this in the University of Chicago with their partnership with Chicago Public Schools. When Chicago Public Schools was in the early stages of trying to figure out how to address graduation rates, they reached out to the University of Chicago, said, we want to understand this. And so the University of Chicago worked with them using secondary data to understand whether there were any markers or indicators that they could look at to help them intervene and help kids graduate on time. And what they found is that by looking at the secondary data, you could go all the way back to freshman year and see that there are certain indicators that were already being measured, already being collected by teachers, that they could show were predictive of failure long-term in their schools. And those are things like attendance. So even if you had extremely high standardized scores, if your attendance was low, then that was predictive of whether or not you were going to graduate on time. It was also things like whether you had more than one F in a class. And so they worked backwards with them. And as you can see from that line, in 2005, when they started working with practitioners with this data and identifying who those students were and providing supports for them with the resources that they had, you see graduation rates boosting up to 82%. And that is the power of a good research practice partnership. So this particular SRPC is multi-institutional for this pilot mode. We have included St. Louis Public Schools as well as Confluence and KIPP because they serve a similar demographic of students, and because the pilot project is on student mobility, which, as we know, we share the same students across schools. Parents don't choose schools based on political affiliation. Many of them choose because it's close to their house or because for whatever reason their kid can get in. And so these are the 3 schools plus our university partners who are doing this work. Per our MOU, none of the funding that we have it should be new to you. All of the funders that are working to support the research part of this work has been approved by the SLPS board. And that includes the James S. McConnell Foundation and a local family private foundation. If you're interested, this is the interim structure. Basically, this slide shows that educators are at the top of the food chain. They are not at the bottom only just receiving the work, but they're helping direct the work through the advisory council, helping set the direction of the research and making sure that we are doing our best to make this useful and practical for all. So I'm going to pause for questions. Does anyone have anything that they would like to ask or understand before moving into student mobility as a topic? If I'm talking too fast, let me know too. Yeah? Okay. All right. So before we get into the student mobility pilot study, just want to refresh our memory of how we got to this place. Student mobility was chosen as a topic by the educators in our design council, which included teachers from Local 420, as well as a principal from KIP and another educator from Confluence, as well as researchers. And basically what they said is they came up with a list of different topics that they would like to understand in St. Louis City that affects kids. But they came up with student mobility as one that is a shared challenge that is affecting them all. And the reason why they said student mobility is such a big topic is that they knew that, yes, there's definitely student mobility due to housing insecurity and perhaps evictions, but there were also all these other reasons for student mobility that they really didn't know and they couldn't predict. They also talked about the negative impacts on school culture that the frequent changing of students before the end of a school year had on a classroom. And it didn't just impact the kids who were coming and going and having to make new friends, but it also impacted the kids who remained in a highly mobile classroom where their kids and their friends were constantly coming to and from the school. Educators also told us that it led to a missing student history or a gap in the transcript. So they weren't really sure how to, work with the student because they weren't sure what kind of history they had in a school. And so all of these challenges were bubbling up to something that they really just wanted to understand. So part of our work was to figure out how to make this into a research agenda. So what we did was we scanned the national research literature on student mobility because we didn't want to redo someone else's study to find out things that maybe were already published. But what we did find is a lot of confirmation of what folks were saying. The consistent conclusion across the board was that mobility in almost every form is harmful. I'm not going to say all forms because there are students that sometimes benefit from going to a different school. But for student outcomes and the adjustment that has to happen socially, emotionally, academically, it gets worse with every single move. So if you have a hypermobile student, which is what our students in St. Louis City have been described as in peer-reviewed literature, hypermobile, every time they move, that creates an impact on their well-being. Another thing that we find with mobility is that, like we said, it not only harms the kids who are there, but who are moving, but it also harms those who stay. And lastly, sometimes it's not by choice, but sometimes it's by policy. And so taking this information, we then created a research agenda that included not only just looking at the data, which, data's numbers, which represents kids, but we also wanted to hear the stories and the experiences of people at the center and what they were really going through when they were making these moves. We also included geospatial mapping to understand what parts of St. Louis people are moving to at what frequency. And we are trying to understand, for the practitioner's perspective, when they can anticipate kids to move the most so that they can be prepared to address those needs. So this was our goal. This was our goal in January. Upon approval from the SLPS board, we worked with DESE to make a data request for de-identified student level data to be able to look at the patterns of movement for students across the region. And they said, cool, yeah, let's go. That was in January. And then we anticipated the data to come in March latest, but it didn't actually get delivered to our researchers at WashU until December. So that's a long wait. It's almost a whole year. And so a lot of these things have had to be pushed back a bit, but in the interim, we wanted to still be useful for practitioners. So we started looking at what was publicly available. Any one of us in this room could go onto DESE's website and download any of these Excel files. So this is data and information that if you go to our website, you can also see the R code that was used to analyze the data. But what we found was startling. And actually what the educators were saying was very, very spot on. In half of St. Louis City schools, charters and district included, at least 37% or more of their student bodies were transferring in or out before the end of a school year. So if you have a school of 100 kids, that means 37 of your kids are either leaving or coming before the end of the year. One educator told us, as an educator, my goal is to develop kids over the long term, but that growth has to happen super fast because I don't know how long I'm going to have them. So it makes it really challenging to get those outcomes that Desi's asking us to get when students aren't even stable in a classroom for the entire year, for the most part. We also took that data and just put it into a descriptive analysis. For those who are interested in the statistics, you can definitely look at it. It is not adjusted or weighted for size of schools, but we tried to compare our region compared to similar regions or similar counties around us. And we found that in this box plot on the left, which I'm happy to explain to you if you really want to go deep into it, basically we have a lot more student mobility than many of the regions around us, including Kansas City, but definitely including St. Louis County and all the surrounding counties like Franklin, Jefferson, et cetera. If you look at this data over time, you'll find that generally these numbers have decreased, but still we have some of the highest rates of student mobility in the region, in the state. So this is the power of looking at data over time, the power of understanding what's happening here. So we didn't want to just stop there. We took this information and then we said, we don't want to interpret ourselves. We want to understand if we're looking at the data correctly. And so we gathered educators from different schools and said, if you'd like to look at your data and help us understand it, we would love to sit with you and learn from you. And they told us stories. They helped us interpret the fact that, you know, the policies that we have may force us to count someone as being mobile, even though they're really just staying at home and not coming to school, but then we have to re-enroll them when they come back. Those are stories that we heard. And then they also told us that the things that they would love to know if they could find this out from the research. And so this example on the right shows for group 4, for a student, if we knew the academic impact on mobility of students, then we could, they listed a bunch of things, but one I'll point out is just provide extra supports per school or based on what students need. And this is something that they thought would be super useful if they can understand. Now, I've said that things are delayed. We still have a lot of things to do. This is kind of the list of lots of things to do. But thankfully, we do now have the data, so we can actually start examining that. I'm going to go for just briefly outline the wins and the challenges we've had and then our next steps, and then I'll stop for questions unless anyone has one right now. Just gonna pause.
I just want you to say the figure again. In half of St. Louis City schools, 37% of the students transfer in or out in any given year.
37%. And if you look at certain schools in the district, that's the average or the median. There are certain schools that have a 70% mobility rate, an 80% mobility rate. There's certain numbers where there's more numbers of kids that start in the school year than actually end up at the end of the year. And so, you know, the average doesn't really tell you everything. It just tells you kind of what as a region we're experiencing. It's pretty staggering.
Because in your slide in 14,
yes,
these dots up here, those are the schools that
those are the outliers.
Almost off the charts.
They're almost off the charts. They tend to be high schools. And you could name them. You could probably guess which ones have the highest mobility rates. And often they're correlated with the high rates of poverty that their families may be experiencing too. But yeah, the data, I mean, data's numbers, but they're people to me. Emily.
I just want to say from personal experience, my daughter has been at the same school. She's 9 and in 3rd grade. She's been there the whole time, and she only has 3 or 4 classmates that have been with her the whole time.
3 or 4. Yeah, so the challenge is to understand what can we do to help stabilize for those who don't want to move and maybe wanting to stay in their school. How can we stabilize those kids? And then are there reasons why beyond that we can understand to at least help those students adjust in their new schools? I think there's lots of things that we can do in this research that would be really interesting once we get there. So thanks for those questions and feedback. Just some wins. I'm not going to talk too much about the wins, but I think I'm more of like a glasses half empty type of person, but I'll do it for Dr. Williams. So I think one of the great things that's happening is that this is a group of people that haven't worked formally together on an issue that is shared across the region. And so we're learning how to work with one another. I think there was great acknowledgement that students are shared between school systems. And so working together actually benefited everyone. So that was great. So that bridging is happening as well. The other thing that's happening is that we are building some capacity to engage. And so local universities and institutions have been providing the support pro bono, but foundations are also noticing and want to support the work of the St. Louis Public Schools and others as well, which is really, really great. The other thing is we'll have a brief to share publicly with anyone who's interested in this that kind of details more of the data that we've just briefly shared. And just a special note, we did present this at the legislative committee meeting in November. So if you're interested and you want to dig into the details, go ahead and watch that YouTube channel and find it on the SLPS board. Okay, so this is my favorite part, the challenges. There's so many challenges to this work, and that's why it's a pilot. We didn't want to say that we should just do this forever because we knew that it would be hard and there might be things that we need to tweak. One of the biggest challenges that we've had is just the capacity to engage. We've had some turnover and just changing of positions and key members. And so this makes it just a little bit more challenging to do the work full time. Also, because everyone's volunteering their time and have other full-time roles, this becomes another thing on a list of wrong things that educators have to do. And so we're trying to think about ways that we can either offset their time or support them so that they can engage and we can limit the amount of engagement that we ask them for without diluting the amount of engagement that they can have. The last thing I'll talk about is just timelines. And I've mentioned a couple times, but it has taken so long to get data. And though it was all agreed upon in January, just waiting for that has been such a challenge. And so we apologize for not being able to deliver on what we initially thought, which was our expected timeline up here, that we would be in January 2023, supporting engagement in learnings and intervention design. Instead, we had to wait and make, do with what we had, learn what we could, and then now start doing the cleaning of data and conducting the family and student level surveys and interviews. So there have been challenges. I'm very excited though that the spring is going to lead to some more findings and some more clarity around what's actually happening. So just to highlight a few things that we hope will happen, we will complete the student mobility study. That will happen. We also are exploring just the way that we can secure and keep ethical the way we think about data and the way we're extracting from potentially the community and making sure that people get that information back. And then the last thing we're exploring is if it takes this long to do one question, if there are other questions, what would it look like to start now versus waiting until this is completely done? And of course, this is all up to you all and whether you find this of importance. So with that, I'm going to stop talking because I've talked a lot. You can look at that timeline. But I think the question I'll pose is just, we've talked a lot about the typical practice of research. It's not that we want to throw research completely out because it's been exploitative in the past. We want to use what's best of that, but also change the way in which it's doing. So happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
So Saris, as always, your work is impeccable and it's needed, and your kindness and love for all children is always seen through the things that you do in this region. So I want to thank you for the ways that you always show up for kids. So that's the first thing. The second thing I was thinking about was you talked about how long the research took, and I know that the urgency is now. So in terms of us just waiting for more research to answer more questions, what have you all thought about as possible steps or solutions or ideas or suggestions that you can give us in the present moment so we can do the things that we need to do now to take care of kids, and how we can continue to interact with some of the other systems to do good things for kids?
Ms. Hogan, such a great question. Definitely one I think about a lot because there's so much urgency, as you said, around answering these questions. I think if I asked to shoot for the moon, I think we could start on some of these projects now. Part of the research process and setting the research agenda takes also a lot of time because we're working with practitioners on the ground to understand what they care about. It's not just one person. It's not me sitting in my office that gets to define the research question based on what I'm seeing in the news. I want to know from a teacher, like, what does that look like? So from the school's perspective, giving some of the time that you have from your staff to participate in that type of workshop is super, super helpful. And it doesn't happen without them, honestly. There's no research question without them. The other thing that from a structural perspective, our MOU is up for renewal in February, so we're not proceeding until that is renewed. So that would be a number 2. That might be a check. And then the next piece that I would say is just, if you look at all the other RPPs across the country, there's more than 50. And the ones that seem to spin up research as quickly as possible tend to have a very strong relationship with the schools. And we're not asking for this, but I'm just noting that data pathways are something that is super helpful. Like us waiting for DESE to give us this data that you have given to DESE many months ago is just a delay in the process. But I would never ask that for you until you all are ready or want to, or feel secure in our processes and practices that we're going to actually treat it with the care and attention it needs. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Chung. You, like Brittany said, you always do great work. I got a chance to see your presentation in November. It's really, you know, I know Emily was talking about like her daughter, and I went to 3 different high schools in 4 years. So this totally connects with me because it is, I mean, and obviously on the board, we get all the time, like, you're not doing this for your kids, you're not doing that for their kids. But obviously when their basic needs are not met, such as just a stable home, then how do we get to the other things? And, you know, I, and like most kids in our district, have had personal experiences with that. So thank you for your work and for your data and for highlighting this issue, because it helps provide grounding to us when we are talking to the state and the city and advocating for certain other, you know, for the idea of investing in people, which people will act like is crazy. So thank you for just, you know, helping to provide data to that. I think my question is a little similar to Brittany's. I would love, and obviously I'm a like call to action legislative advocacy girl, but I would love some calls to actions and some recommendations from what you do have and the information you do have. And just any way, anytime we're in a space where we can lift this data up, and especially what you said about this being a shared problem amongst a shared population in our city, because I think that ties to the citywide educational plan. It ties to almost everything as a board that we're doing right now, even our new superintendent search, because these are issues that, like you said, they exist in other places, but they tend to be hyperbolized here in the city. And I think that's really important for our leaders to understand. So I would love calls to action. And also when we tap you, I don't know if this is an option, but when we do things, if it was an option for you to come with us to present your data, or, you know, that way when people are looking at us like we're crazy because in their communities, they don't experience these challenges, you're able to say, well, this is something that's going on. This is a real challenge. Because what I'm hearing is just like, I just would really like to see a shift in our thinking. And I think we talk about students just so sometimes not as this data, as numbers, and not as people, and not as developing human beings who are experiencing hardships. And we talk about families as things for, you know, money and dollars, but not as things worthy of investment. And so I think this data could be really helpful for us as a board when we're trying to show people, you know, hey, our families and our kids are worth the investment and they need it. So we're not just like asking for luxuries, we're trying to just stabilize them.
Absolutely. Happy to support SLPS and their efforts to support kids. Definitely we'll go back to the partners that we work with and figure out what those calls to action are, especially as we have more data. Like right this moment, you know, we're waiting to be able to say what we want to say. We want to be rigorous in that, but happy to do that. The other piece about just serving and speaking, I think that is the beauty of a research practice partnership, because it is an independent entity that is outside of your institution. There is some perception of independence, there should be, of what the data is saying. So instead of SLPS saying, here's our data and here's what's happening in our schools, for someone to say, no, that's definitely true and it's actually worse, or that independence of external thought is super helpful. So happy to serve in any way that is helpful to the city.
Ms. Hubbard and then Ms. Jones.
Okay. You talked about, you know, can you kind of talk more about student mobility versus what we think of mobility, like upward mobility versus lateral mobility? And as well, you said moves are by choice or policy. Could you talk more about the policy part?
Sure. So I think what you're describing is the basic thing I should have said in the first place, which is, what is student mobility? Student mobility as defined by DESE is a move in between grades. So not at a natural transition point, such as from elementary school to middle school, but perhaps before the end of a school year. moving different schools. So that's how we are defining student mobility using the DESI definition. If you look at the broader literature, people will talk about churn rates, which means like just how quickly people are moving in your school, regardless of if it's in or out, transfer out rates, transfer in rates. There's lots of definitions in there. But in terms of moves by policy, moves by choice, obviously we know that moves by choice are like, hey, this school's not working for me, I'd like to move. We see a lot of that in St. Louis in a school choice environment. But moves by policy are things like either you are, yes, evicted from your home, or you are experiencing some sort of housing situation. So you feel like you have to move a school to be closer to where you are. But there's also moves by policy that are dependent on school policy. So for instance, if you get suspended, you can no longer attend that school, and that counts towards the student mobility rate too. So I hope I'm not speaking on that. I'll double check, but there are certain things within the school policies also that may force or feel forcing to a student to feel like they need to move. Thanks.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for all your hard work that you've put into this effort. But I just want to get straight to the point, because I'm one of those people that live in those communities that are highly mobile. I live in Walnut Park. And in Walnut Park, it's the land of Band-Aid people for me. They're Band-Aid cars, Band-Aid lives, utility costs. But it was a result of a planned activity, which is called Team 4. So, which is in the making for decades. And so I'm trying to really understand. I know that the people who are involved in this effort are people with degrees and what have you, but this was all a planned effort to cleanse a racial cleansing that's going on in North St. Louis for the land. Everybody keeps saying that there's nothing going on in North St. Louis, and there is nothing going on. In my particular neighborhood, I've been there almost 25 years in my house, and right now the city has taken, this is how mobility goes, $30,000 to invest in a vacant home to fix it up. But a homeowner like myself, I can't get that kind of help to stay in the neighborhood, and I'm a voter. And so, and I go back to 2006 when I worked for the St. Louis Lead Prevention Coalition, and I lived in a community where I would go and I would visit all the various homes. And when people would allow me to go into their homes, and I was honored, but it was frightening because there were 2 or 3 families living in a 2-bedroom home. People trying to find places to live because the people who were in charge and leadership, they should be like, they just recently locked some of our leaders up. They should have gone to jail because they intentionally destroyed a whole community. And that's what we had the result of now when they talk about crime, when they talk about all of this and all of that. Last night, my neighbor had their house shot up and a baby was laying on the couch. But that's the result of living in a community where there are no resources. When you go down the street, all you see is a fried rice place, liquor store, and nothing is there. And people try to figure out, oh, well, what happened? Well, you know what happened. You're not building in my neighborhood. You're not putting any money in my neighborhood. And when my kids graduate, they don't have any kind of skill set. That's why I keep saying people want to say, oh, well, career readiness, going to college, that's all wonderful. My children went to college as well because I was one of those parents that went to school, sat in the back, and I want to know because my kids weren't perfect and I knew they weren't. But there were a lot of kids that I knew that I would follow, and they weren't getting the resources, and they were not getting the help that they needed. And this is what's happening right now. So I don't know how much more research you all need to do, but what needs to happen is that almost $1 billion that the city received was supposed to go to the voters and the people of the city of St. Louis. And that's what needs to happen, because to me, that's a waste of money to continue to research when we already know what the true reason for what's going on now. This is to keep Black folks and people of color in their place. You got that soccer stadium over there, and that soccer stadium is sitting right on land that Black folks used to live in. And now they got is some kind of little metal statues over there to honor them. When I went out there to the cemetery right there where the Metro Link goes through, I was so appalled with all the headstones pushed over to the side, maybe 20 or 30 of them, just disrespecting the ancestors. And nobody cared, nobody say anything. My mother, they buried over there on Broadway, and trash coming all inside the cemetery. Nobody cared, nobody cared. Nobody cares. That's what I'm saying. This CPN, the SLPS, asking the teachers, that's all well and good. But where are the Black teachers? They all disappeared from SLPS anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You talking about this, but it bothers me because I live
Absolutely.
right in the heart of all of this. We don't need any more researchers. What we need is our money. We need money into the neighborhoods. We don't need any more conversation. Let's bring that money back. And then nobody needs to say anything. Just bring the money back. And it's
Thank
not you personally.
Not
You
taken.
didn't do it. But we know who did it and they didn't go to jail.
Ms.
Where they
Jones,
should have
thank
been
you.
up underneath jail.
Thank you.
Dr. Chung, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
presentation. Thank you for your presentation in November, and we look forward to talking to you more and seeing the results of your research.
Thank
I
you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda will be approval of the December 13th, 2022 minutes. Could I get a motion?
I move to approve the December 13th, 2022 minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Henry?
Ms. Hubbard,
Yes.
Ms. Hogan,
Yes.
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Val,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Item that I do want to take separately. Are there any other items on the December, or I'm sorry, the January consent agenda that anyone would like to take separately? If not, if I could get a motion to approve 1/10/23/01 through 1/10/23/07.
Move to approve 1/10/23/01 through 1/10/23/07.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just one point of clarity on 1/10/23/02. So 23/01 is to support 177 Afghan refugee students. And 23/02 is to support 306 refugee students. Do we know where they are coming from? Do we have any Ukrainian students who are coming into the district, or is this just in general about the average population?
Dr. Gonzalez Castillo will address that question. Thank
Good
you.
evening. So the first one is specifically to support students from Afghanistan, and the second one covers our students who are coming from Afghanistan and some of the other countries. Specifically, we had a huge number of refugees coming from Congo, and some of the other countries as well. But this has been the two main ones in the last couple of months. We have not seen an increase of refugees from Ukraine. We actually only have 4 students currently enrolled in the district.
Thank you for the clarity.
Any further discussion? Mrs. Henry?
Ms. Hubbard,
Yes.
Ms. Hogan,
Yes.
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Val,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Motion passed.
The only new item is item 1/10/23/08. It is to approve a contract with the Council of Great City Schools to perform a system and compliance audit of the Transportation Department of the St. Louis School District for the period January 2022 through June 2022 at a cost not to exceed $50,000 pending funding availability. Can I get a motion to approve that item?
Motion to approve 1/10/23/08.
Second.
Any questions or discussion?
Yes, I have a question.
1 second, Tony. I'll move you over to the microphone. All right, go ahead.
I do support this particular process, but I guess my question is, where are we in regards to the HR audit that we had done by Council of Great Cities? Have we received that full report as of yet?
I'm going to ask our Deputy Superintendent, Chief Human Resources Officer, Charles Burton, to address that question, Mrs. Cousins, Vice
Thank you,
President.
Dr.
Cousins.
Williams.
Good evening, Board. We don't have the final report yet. I spoke with Mr. Burrows from the council today. He assured me we would have it by the close of business on Friday. And so the expectation is we'll have it this week. And of course, then the board will have it once we have it.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. My question in regards to that, do we have, are we putting some level of timeline with this particular request that we're doing with Council of Great Cities? Because I know for the HR audit, that was something that we had approved over a year and a half ago. And I don't want the transportation MOU to linger that long, because this is data or information that we're trying to get a better response on.
Mr. Watson, do you have an answer to that?
So two questions, Ms. Cousins' question, and then also Deputy Superintendent Watson. We just want to correct the pillar where this particular item resides currently. Thank you.
So to the first question, and good evening, everyone. To the first question, we do not have a timeline in regards to when the council will begin this particular process of auditing. And to the second point, there's an amendment or correction that needs to be made to that particular resolution. That pillar supports Pillar 1, which was creating a system of excellent schools. So I did want to make that revision as well. But I'll follow up on the initial question, Board Member Cousins, in regards to the timeline for the transportation audit.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I think what I'm just asking, and I want to make sure that we put in there, is that we're looking for them to provide us a timeline of date of start and a date of completion that they'll be able to get that done. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Are we,
Yes, ma'am.
are we hoping that this will have results for students this school year who are, not having their buses come and such?
So Mr. Watson can address this. Ms. Cousins and I had asked if there was something that we can do to sort of examine our systems of transportation. I do believe that through the audit committee, the internal auditor was monitoring the bus contract and compliance. So I think that will play a part into that as well. I think we're just looking for, there's got to be a better way. And so this was recommended as similar to the HR systems review. This is a service that they provide, that we have a relationship with. We have membership in the Council of Great City Schools. So if you have more details on what they will provide, but it's going to be a systems review and comparing us to other school districts. And so it's executives from other school districts and to see if we comply with best practices.
So as a follow-up to that, I guess I was wondering, Ms. Jones, for one, has talked a lot about examining whether it would be beneficial for St. Louis Public Schools to operate our own buses and have our own routes, looking into electric buses, et cetera. Is that the scope of this audit just for the contracts that we have, or is it really comparative across other districts of similar size who do operate their own bus systems and other alternative education transportation solutions?
So to your first question in regards to the scope of what this particular audit will entail, it will encompass all of those things. And it'll be based on other districts similar to St. Louis Public Schools across the country, sharing best practices, resources, all of those things to our, so that we'll be able to be more efficient with our transportation department.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, Mrs. Henry.
Ms. Hubbard,
Yes.
Ms. Hogan,
Yes.
Ms. Tonier,
Yes.
Ms. Lau,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Next, we move on to board member reports and committee reports. We'll start on the end with our student reps, Ms. Sharma, Ms. Alhajeri. Any reports you'd like to make? No pressure. We haven't seen you in a while, so what have you been up to? No pressure, and we can come back.
Okay, I guess, we have gone back to school. This is our 5th day after the break, and it's, everyone's been seeing each other and talking about the break, and, being able to spend time with family and kind of reflect on this past year, I think has been good for everyone. And I know that I look forward to this year and the change that I hope we can make.
I agree with Sonali. I think we're all at Collegiate, at least we're all happy to be back at school. CVPA has not yet returned. We're looking forward to their return next Tuesday. And all very exciting. Seniors at Collegiate have begun their internships and capstone projects. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any going down the line, Ms. Hubbard? Ms. Sonier?
President Davis and I got a chance to go to, and Dr. Williams got a chance to go to the Northside Economic Empowerment Center opening that is in Sumner. So I just wanted to thank Sumner's advisory board and Principal Nichols and Aaron Williams and Neil Richardson and St. Louis Development Corporation. We were able to get a tour and see how they're utilizing some of the spaces. We were able to talk to some of the small business owners in the community that have already been able to get assistance from that space. They have a space in there too that will give updates on like the LRA process and properties and things like that. So I was just really pleased to see that and to see that type of collaboration between SLPS and the city and SLDC, and to see tangibly that it's already benefiting and helping small business owners. I think that is it for my report.
Ms. Fowle?
No report.
Ms. Jones?
No report.
Ms. Cousins? No? Okay, I'm gonna give yours, Ms. Cousins.
Thank you, Matt.
The citywide plan will hold its third public meeting to update progress on the initiative. It is set for January 25th at Glazers Union Hall at 6 p.m. Look for social media updates for more details. I want to give an update on the superintendent search process. The application's closed on December 30th. The board is now tasked with a meeting with the search firm, which will be a closed session this Friday to review the applications. There will be an update after that meeting regarding the interview process, which we will set at that meeting, and we will expect final candidates to be in St. Louis and will be presented in some way, we haven't decided how yet, to the community at the end of the month or early in February, depending on schedules. But we are on track. So if you go to slpssupersearch.com, it has the full timeline and we are exactly on track, which is great. The legislative committee will not meet this month because of, as Dr. Williams said, there will be a Parent Action Council Day of Action on the 31st. So we are supporting them in anything that we need on the 31st. Legislation has been fast and furious. Last week was the first day of session, so they've been sorting out committee assignments. There have been over 150 bills related to education, which is approximately 10% of the bills that have been filed. So it will be another very heavy year of discussions of education. So we will be very busy in the months to come until the end of session in May. And that concludes my reports. Our next item of business is public comment. I believe. Oh, Tony now has a report.
I don't have.
You're supposed to.
I don't have a report. I just wanted to recognize Dr. Williams and her team, as well as the other board members. I think Donna talked on it, but we did have a retreat. It was pretty much an all-day retreat on Saturday, but it was very informative. And I was very impressed with what we were able to see. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, but I was impressed with what we have set in motion. And I'm excited to see what's to come in regards to the district as a whole for the work that's been put in thus far.
Thank you, Ms. Cousins. Our next item of business is public comment. Our first speaker is Ms. Crystal Barnett. A reminder, public comment is limited to 3 minutes, and we ask everyone be respectful. Ms. Barnett?
be that hard. All right. Happy New Year, y'all. Last year on the 13th, we had two parents from our Parent Education Advocacy Academy come and speak to you all about some of the characteristics they wanted to see in a new superintendent. What we got the chance to do was sit down with a lot of parents from SLPS specifically, and they wrote a manifesto for you all to use, hopefully, as you go into your sessions with interviews and then how you choose the next superintendent. I did bring copies of it for you all to read, but I did want to read it to you, if that's okay, and it shouldn't take more than 3 minutes. It says, we the parents and leaders of Bridge to Hope demand and advocate and support parents to fight for inequitable policies and to ensure that children have access to high quality education. Towards that end, we understand the power of an effective superintendent, his or her impact on student achievement. Our mission is to ensure that parent voices are heard, acknowledged, and factored into the final decisions. Until then, Bridge to Hope stands in the gap for the children to ensure that SLPS Board of Education hires a superintendent who demonstrates the characteristics listed below. We would like to see a superintendent that leads with courage and has authenticity and transparency. A person who has demonstrated success in increasing academic achievement in a district similar to SLPS, has a plan to ensure that every student reads at or above grade level going forward, and that is implemented properly throughout all the schools in the district, is hands-on and willing to interact with parents on the ground, cares and shows compassion for all children that they serve and all children in the city of St. Louis, and has a real plan to address school equity and the whole child. We hope that this person you all choose has a lived experience that identifies with the student that SLPS serves, and that they will value parents and the community with partnership. We have high expectations that the next superintendent will lead with high expectations and courage and boldness. As SLPS majority stakeholders, some of them are standing here today. We've had the opportunity since 2019 to work with hundreds of parents from this district. All of them are in compliance with what I'm reading you today. So you're not just hearing it from me, who I am now also a SLPS mom. My daughter goes to Ames Elementary, but you're also hearing from all the parents we've had the chance to work with and encourage to build partnerships and have better understanding and advocacy in this district. So their children not only attend this school, but they actually do well and thrive and go forward in their lives the way the state of Missouri promised. I'm hoping that you all will adopt this as a part of your process as you go into choosing the next superintendent. And I'm hopefully expecting some type of something in writing. If there are parents from Bridge to Hope that you want to speak to, that is an option, and they're more than willing to meet with you. Is that my time?
It is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nevels McNeil. Ms. Nevels McNeil.
So happy New Year to everyone. So I passed out to you that came from the public school retirement system, the city of St. Louis, a pamphlet we get out. It says COLA increase. What's happening? Maria Walden, our executive director of Missouri High Teachers, says that the way this law is written, we will never get a cost of living. So it has been, I'm not going to read it out to you because it's here. Since in paragraph number 2 in 2017, the Missouri legislature passed Senate Bill number 62, which contained provision lowering the employer's contribution rate, affecting the fund's status and the actual salaries of the public school retirement system in the city of St. Louis. So they're projecting in 2034, we should get a cost of living. Now, it says 2006 was the last cost of living, which was 17 years ago. That there's 11 years until 2034. There will be 28 years. Is really over, like what you call them, decades. It's like a lifespan. It's really 2 lifespans. So some people will never get a cost of living. There's some people, however, you get Social Security, but we pay into Social Security. So, but I want some of my money to come, from my fund that I put in. So we forget about that. So I'm wondering about the $1,000 so it has not been issued. And it's like, I don't know why it voted up and down so we can know what's going on. And as it's been said, most of the Black teachers are not coming back into the system because they were done so wrong. Some of us were done wrong too. But in 2006, it wasn't as bad. It was still a little bit more. I had a good superintendent there. So it's like, we just kind of like tired of being tired. So I would think you should do something to make us feel, the employees, that you do care, because we still do care and we're still fighting. But the main thing is this legislation has to be changed. So I know my time is up. And while I'll be in Jefferson City, I'd like to take the bus on the 31st with you. I will also be there on February the 14th, lobbying with Missouri state teachers. And we are against charter schools. We are for public schools at MRTA. Thank you.
Mr. Alexander.
Hello. Thanks for having us here today, or tonight, or this afternoon, but we are ready to war no more. War, weed, alcohol, rifles. This is sad. They replaced neighborhood public schools with war. You can't find public schools in North St. Louis, but you can easily find weed, alcohol, or rifles in the Black communities. But it is hard to find a quality neighborhood public school that our children can attend without busing them out where some people fight to keep them out of. As we venture into this new year, we cannot fall for the tricks of the past 404 years that kept us working for those who would rather see us in bondage or in their prison. We are not asking for our schools to be reopened, clean up our area, get rid of crime, or put in place medical facilities that will help us. Since we are seated at the table, we're requesting in our proposal with other committee members funding that can make our suggestions a reality and not just a dream. Last time we checked, we are American citizens who pay our fair share of taxes, but tax dollars are not working for North St. Louis. They seem to work for white neighborhoods. We want this war to end on all communities, especially those in North St. Louis. Weed must be replaced with neighborhood community gardens. Alcohol must be replaced with non-contaminated healthy drinking water. Rifles used to kill must be replaced with pencils and pens, books, and reopened neighborhood schools, Title I funded public schools. Lastly, if these things can't be accomplished, knowing the gravity of the situation at hand, our plight will change. We must stand strong with other organizers that think like us. 2023 must not look like 1619. Who can represent us better than us representing ourselves?
Mr. Alexander,
Thank
that's your time. Thank you. Mrs. Alexander, do you have additional remarks?
They're all remarks.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. A house divided can't stand. Let's continue the team forward conversation. Generally, we are told that our public schools are closed because of failing grades or performance of the children. But usually it's the enrollment of the children in the schools that are being closed. You also close our traditional public schools because in your thinking, the buildings are too old. However, these same beautiful historic school buildings are reopened and used to house renters. Here's some things wrong with the logic for closing our neighborhood public schools. Children are not failing. They're not failing in their academic studies. The institutions that take shortcuts and hire inexperienced teachers are the ones who are failing our children. Children are performing, but they're not being taught the basics. Cursive writing has been eliminated from schools because some so-called educators believe it takes an enormous amount of instructional time. When the St. Louis Public Schools closed 7 more schools in 2021, the attendance should have been low because the 2020 COVID era laws changed how the schools, businesses, government facilities, and medical buildings respected the boundaries that were set up to keep people safe. And reading about what SLPS thinks is successful, the success stories found on the St. Louis Public Schools website includes closing 22 public schools, selling them and reopening them to use for people to reside in. But remember, these schools were too old to teach our children in, but not too old to have people live in them. Many of us are aware that the last superintendent had his hand in most of these one-sided deals. But our communities are working hard to change the trajectory of how St. Louis Public Schools has put our most vulnerable children in by taking away their schools where they walk together together with their siblings and their friends. And you reopen their schools as charter schools, residential or commercial use, or market rate apartments. How is this successful when this type of action doesn't benefit the children, families, and generations that have been educated in these historic school buildings? It is hoped that St. Louis Public Schools, Board of Education, and the new superintendent will work with concerned groups and citizens to stop the closure of our neighborhood public schools and successfully prepare our children for their future and what's in front of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Alexander. Mr. Monroe.
Don, I want to address you personally and what your response was. And first of all, I want to make one comment before I do. I'm an ex-St. Louis police officer. I still think like a cop. And I would ask this Board of Education to do what St. Charles community did, and they access ARPA funds to provide additional armed security for all of their schools. Our children deserve no less. So I would ask our security department to look at what's going on out in St. Charles and other communities. And our children must be protected and not just talked about. The other part, I don't miss a board meeting. And each time I sit at this podium, I ask this board for certain things. I get no response. I get no response. And I'll ask again, Donna, right now, the American Rescue Plans has millions. And Bill Monroe and Harriet Tubman, the CEO, I'm the CEO of Harriet Tubman, the nonprofit, has solicited the our city government in chaos. They got millions of dollars sitting on God knows for what reason. Bill Monroe has asked for $16.5 million ARPA funds to save Beaumont High School and open Beaumont as Harriet Tubman Preparatory High School and Career Center. And 2 other schools, one, Stowe Elementary, they're on the corner of Goodfellow and Lotus, Goodfellow and Cove Brilliant. where we opened Stowe Elementary as a dorm for our young boys that need help. And you mentioned homeless, and you mentioned studies and studies and studies and no action. And we also asked that Banneker on Samuel Shepherd Drive, a vacant school building crumbling in North St. Louis. We asked that Banneker be utilized for a female dorm for our homeless young ladies. And on the first floor of that dorm, we put a daycare center for the children of the children that are homeless. So we ask that when will you sit down? I see all kind of organizations, mostly white. When will you sit down with a black man? I see no black man on this board. We have in our community right now, we lead the country in death among young black boys. And we see no representation of black males on this board. Do you care? Donna, I'm listening to you.
Time's up, Mr. Monroe.
And so when these programs come,
Mr.
make
Murphy.
an issue out of it, Donna. Stand to it. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Kwanzaa, Christmas, etc. First of all, I want to welcome Superintendent Dr. Nicole Williams in a spirit of democracy, empathy, and peaceful conflict resolution. Conflict resolution that's based on accountability regardless of rank. I was listening to what was being spoken about this evening, and I recall that last year, I heard that Dylan stewards were supposed to be able to attend the ESSER fund meetings, because I remember Don had brought that up. I've yet to be invited to a one of those meetings. I was also told I was supposed to be invited to the meeting of the consortium from Washington U that was training principals. I've yet to be invited to that. And I got some questions we can talk about whatever the training is. We need to pay attention to this whole gifted screening that's happening right now. I'll tell you something about gifted screening. It can either be predominantly white, gifted, or predominantly black, depending on how it's carried out. And there's some signs that what we got going on here is headed towards the predominantly white. As far as extra funds, there's a place here in town called the Griot Museum of Black History. Every child, every grown-up, every person in this town needs to go through that museum. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Hey, mobility ain't nothing but homelessness. I was introduced to homelessness back in the day. You know, there was a time when we could actually take students and go out and, you know, video football games and all that. We kind of started that. But as I would pick a student up in the morning, when I take them home, it would be to a different location. And later on, I found out that's what some people were calling mobility, but that's homelessness. Because they don't know where they're going to go home to sometimes. So I think we need to stop all the studying and start doing some helping. One of the first things I worked on after I put out of Vianney and left that and came in this St. Louis around 1972.
Murphy, that's 3 minutes. Sorry.
All right. Just want to say, we was talking about Team 4 way back then.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That concludes public comment, and that concludes our formal agenda. Could we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mrs. Henry.
Ms. Hubbard,
Yes.
Ms. Hogan.
Yes.
Ms. Sonia.
Yes.
Ms. Bao,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Ms. Sharma,